Hello. Well, in this edition, we're going to pick apart Starmer's responses to that huge government petition against the introduction of a national digital ID scheme. Welcome to Grey Matters. Hello, and welcome to Grey Matters, the channel that promotes the fact that the older generation still matters and has relevance, and which looks at issues that matter to the older generation. But this edition, I think, is going to matter to everybody, because right now, I'm sure you all know about that petition that is against the introduction of digital ID cards for UK citizens. It has just under 3 million signatures, so it's very likely that you signed that petition. In which case you would have received an update in the form of a response by the government. But for those who haven't seen that response, we're going to go through it and pick apart the main points, because the government's response, in other words Starmer's, is unbelievable. Remember, just because the petition reached 100,000 signatures doesn't mean it will be debated in Parliament, only that it will be considered for debate. And I reckon the last thing Starmer will want is a debate about it before he presents his legislation to Parliament. Anyway, straight off the bat, in the very first paragraph of this response, the thing that struck me was Starmer's self-assuredness. Bearing in mind it's not been before Parliament yet, and there is a substantial groundswell of opposition across all parties, the first line states, "We will introduce a digital ID within this Parliament." Will you? Not if the British public has its way. And then it goes on to say that the ID scheme will tackle illegal migration, make accessing government services easier, and enable wider efficiencies, whatever the heck that means. And in the last sentence of that paragraph, he says, "We will consult on the details soon." Oh, come on. I think you can safely say that the consultation is done with around 3 million signatures on that petition. So tell me, Mr. Starmer, what exactly will your consultation consist of? Are you going to spend tens of thousands of taxpayers' money to a consultation firm who will sample the industry standard of 1,000 people? Who knows, maybe they'll go mad and survey several thousand for you, and probably all hand-picked. Or am I being too cynical? No, okay. In truth, the government states they will consult with employers, trade unions, civil society groups, whatever they are, and other stakeholders, whoever they are. It kind of sounds reasonable, but then the truth behind this consultation is revealed. They're only consulting to ensure the ID scheme will be as inclusive and as secure as possible. Not whether we want it. They then go on to say, following consultation, we will seek to bring legislation forward to underpin the system. Okay, maybe I wasn't being so cynical after all, because when Starmer says he'll consult, he doesn't mean on whether we want digital ID, whether it's wanted or needed. He just wants to know how to make it inclusive and secure. And even that could be a lie. He then says, following consultation, we will seek to bring legislation forward to underpin the system. Well, that clearly tells us that as far as he's concerned, the results are a foregone conclusion. The fact that he's got nearly 3 million people telling him they don't want it, well, that's another matter, isn't it? That he'll probably ignore. And I suggest if he ignores that, well, that's at his political peril, as far as I can see. You can't ignore a groundswell of opinion like that. Now, next in this response, we look at the government's attempt to whitewash over the reasons for the scheme. They, Starmer, say that they are committed to making people's everyday lives easier and more secure. Yeah, and they want to put more control in our hands, including control over our own data. It's amazing, isn't it? So there's a couple of issues there. I would suggest, because almost every economist and pundit predicts the future of this scheme, when the full effect comes into force, will be total control over the population. How will that make life easier? when the government controls every aspect of our lives, from the things we do online to the items we purchase to the holidays we take and the countries we visit, the food we eat, and so on and so on and so on. And then what about giving us more control over our data? I mean, it's obvious that we're going to have to sacrifice our private data to access the things we need to use. Every interaction we have, from doctor and dentist to banking to loan transactions, our spending patterns and so much more, will have to be shared with central government. And there have been data breaches in the past in government departments. I mean, I mentioned recently the DVLA data breaches, hundreds of them. And with all that citizen information, the government's databases will become the primary target for every foreign country's cyber task force, who will, without doubt, they'll break through our cyber security and access our data and hold the UK to ransom. But we know the government's got the brains of a geranium, so I've no doubt they will just install Norton 360 and hope for the best. And then we come to a blatant lie. Starmer has been saying recently that the digital ID scheme was in their election manifesto, but no one could find it. Well, in this petition response, he claims that it was in line with their manifesto commitment to modernise government. So, since when would imposing an ID scheme on virtually every citizen be modernising the government? And in any event, it was only a year ago that the government ruled out the introduction of digital ID cards after Tony Blair said they would help control immigration. One of the government's big thrusts and reasons for bringing it in, they claim. Well, that statement by Tony Blair was quickly followed by Yvette Cooper, who stated emphatically, "It's not in our manifesto, that's not our approach." And when pressed by the BBC if he could rule out ID cards, the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, said, "We can rule that out. It's not something that's part of our plans." So Starmer's lying again. It wasn't in the manifesto. All he's done is to add digital ID into the manifesto pledge to modernise the government. Talk about interpretation and spin. And I have to ask, were Cooper and Reynolds also lying? Because it seems that Starmer's commitment to the scheme isn't an overnight decision. This has been in the ballpark for a long, long time. Chill. So, next, the petition response tries to allay our fears by telling us that digital ID cards will not be compulsory, it will not be a criminal offence not to hold a digital ID, and the police will not be able to demand to see it as part of stop and search. Hooray, I hear you say, I'm not going to get one then. Well, however, the government says it will be mandatory for some applications. And when we pick this apart, basically it's needed by everyone. For example, employers will have to check digital ID when conducting a right to work check. So that's basically everybody who works at some point, because people change jobs. Not everyone stays in the same job. Some people flip from job to job to job. But it basically means the entire workforce of the UK is going to need digital ID at some point. And you're going to need it to access your tax records. So that's every self-employed person. You'll need it to access benefits. So that's probably everyone on low incomes and many disabled people. And I mean, in fact, it's everyone receiving benefits of any kind. And that will include pensioners receiving state pension, because the government classes it as a contributory benefit, not a right. So that's another 14 million people. And they don't say this, but I reckon you probably need one to apply for or renew a passport or driving licence to ensure that you're entitled to have one. So, all in all, that's probably most of the population who must have one to carry out their legal rights to access these services. Hardly seems like a voluntary scheme to me. Does it to you? So who's left who won't need a digital ID? Well, people under 16. Although they're thinking of lowering that to 13. Yeah, I can't think of anyone else at the moment who might need one. I don't know if you can. This voluntary ID card. Yeah, I just thought why the 13-year-olds would need it. Probably for paper rounds, because it's employment, isn't it? This is a stitch-up, pure and simple in my opinion. The thing we need to cling to, unless of course you're in favour of the scheme, is that the groundswell of parliamentary opposition continues to grow and that the legislation fails at the first hurdle. I've no doubt Starmer will invoke the whip, in which case it will need many Labour MPs to show some real strength of character and the courage of their convictions to vote against him. We'll just have to wait and see. All in all, this response to the petition is just a feeble attempt at gaslighting. It's a document of lies, spin and misdirection. I just hope no one falls for it. Well, that's it for now. If you like the content, please like, subscribe and hit the hype button if you can find it. Do leave us your comments. Do leave us what you think about this, I'm going to say it, terrible scheme. If they want to bring it out, I dread the thought of that becoming part of our daily lives. Let us know what you think. If you think differently, by all means let us know. We don't delete comments just because we disagree with them. If you swear, you might get deleted, but you know, all your comments matter. I've said it before, we are a comment driven channel. In other words, that a lot of our content is in response to the comments we get. I've had some very interesting emails and a couple of them have potentially leading to some content that we'll be producing in due course. So that's it. There won't be an edition next week because we're popping off to Wales at this weekend and going to spend a few days away recharging our batteries and having some nice fresh air walks. That'll be a change for me. I'm not a walker. I can't see the point when I've got a perfectly good car. We'll see how we get on with that. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and until the next time on Grey Matters, it's bye for now.